What is going on, folks? Hope everybody's having a wonderful Friday morning. Let's get an early start on this edition of Hold Them Back. As always, folks, this issue of Hold Them Back is brought to you by Proverbs 24, verse 11. My orders are clear, folks. Please do not be offended. Please. Just doing my job, folks. Rescue those being led away to death and hold back those who are staggering toward the slaughter. Folks, those are my orders, and I intend to do the best that I can, folks, but the rest is up to you. Continuing on again with Acts chapter 10, Kill and Eat, but again, focusing right now on Mark chapter 7. Real quick, let's go to the video from my friends here at Emissaries of Yeshua. Emissaries of Yeshua, as they're explaining, did Jesus really declare all foods clean? Mark 7:19 explained. This is a YouTube short.
Okay, a quick study of Mark chapter 7, where Mark makes a statement that says, thus he declared all foods clean. If that statement is a gloss, that is not the statement. Jesus did not make that statement. However, let's take this into context and see what we can come up with in the proper meaning of that scripture. He says, thus declaring all foods clean. The discussion was about dirt on your hands, spiritually defiling bread that was already made clean. Secondly, the second part of the context was about the rabbinical law superseding that of God's law, meaning man's law was more important than God's law. Thirdly, if we're going to take the statement, thus declaring all foods clean, to a first century Jew, this was not about reclassifying what food is clean and unclean. It was about food that was already classified as clean by the Father is not made defiled by dirt on your hands. Keep it in context.
There you go, folks. There you go. Let's go ahead and rewind the tape and break this one down, folks. Again, another edition of Hold Them Back.
Okay, a quick study of Mark chapter 7, where Mark makes a statement that says, thus he declared all foods clean. If that statement is a gloss, that is not the statement. Jesus did not make that statement. However, let's take this into context and see what we can come up with in the proper meaning of that scripture. He says, thus declaring all foods clean. The discussion was about dirt on your hands, spiritually defiling bread.
Is that true? Well, remember Acts 17:11, search the scriptures daily to see if these things are so. So let's go ahead and do that, folks. Let's search the scriptures. Let's see if that is the context. Mark chapter 7. I'm taking this one out of the KJV, not the NIV. Taking this one out of the KJV, not the NIV. And we see in Mark 7 verses 1 through 13, then came together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes which came from Jerusalem. And when they saw some of his disciples eat bread with defiled, that is to say, with unwashed hands, they found fault. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, except they wash their hands often, eat not holding the tradition of the elders. And when they come to the market, except they wash, they eat not, and many other things there be which they have received to hold, as the washing of cups and pots, brazen vessels, and of tables. Verse 5, then the Pharisees and scribes asked him, why walk not your disciples according to the tradition of the elders, but eat bread with unwashed hands? We see here, folks, clearly that all Jews, the Pharisees and all Jews, wash their hands often before they eat bread after the tradition of the elders. Are the disciples of Yeshua Jews? Yes, they are. Did they used to wash their hands before they ate bread? Of course they did. It says in the text, all Jews do. But for some reason, Yeshua's disciples are no longer doing what all Jews do and what they used to do because they're Jews. So the Pharisees want to know, why aren't they? The response coming from Yahshua himself. We're going to find out the answer to why Yahshua's disciples are no longer doing what all Jews do after the tradition of the elders, as the context shows, and that is to wash your hands before they eat bread. The answer is, he answered and said unto them, well has Isaiah prophesied of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Okay? And then he goes into the law of Corban, calls out their hypocrisy. All right, bringing up your father, honor your father and your mother, the law of Corban. Okay, and the whole point is, as my good friend from Emissaries of Yahshua stated, is that they make void the commandment of Yahweh for the sake of their man-made commandments and traditions. That is the context of Mark 7, 1 through 13. Now, notice, got this color coded to help you out. Let's take a look at this a little bit deeper. Again, searching that passage. There we go. Now, again, these are the first 13 verses of Mark 1 through 7. We find here that the Pharisees see that Yahshua's disciples are eating their bread with defiled, that is to say, unwashed hands. We also see that all Jews wash their hands before they eat bread after the tradition of the elders. We know that the disciples are Jews. This is all context. Okay? We see that the Pharisees want to know, why are the disciples of Yahshua not doing what all Jews do? And what is that? That is eating bread with unwashed hands. So, there are three reasons why, three possibilities why the disciples are not washing their hands before they eat bread. Option number one, the disciples just felt like doing something different that day for no apparent reason. No, well, of course not. That is not context. Option number two, the disciples just wanted to upset the Pharisees. No, that's not context. Or option number three, which is what the scriptures show us. Option number three, the Pharisees ask, why are they not washing their hands before they eat bread after the tradition of the elders? The response from Yahshua the Messiah in Mark 7, 6 through 7 is, we'll take it up on this screen right here. I'll go back to that color-coded one so we can see it better. There we go. The response from Yahshua is, and the answer to the question of the Pharisees, here it is, here's the context in the passage. He answered and said unto them, well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. There is your answer. The disciples learned from Yahshua that eating with unwashed hands does not defile you, because it is simply the doctrines and commandments of men. It is not a commandment of his Father, which is why we see that the disciples understand, because they're no longer washing their hands before they eat bread. Had they not understood that, then they would have continued to wash their hands before they ate bread, because we know all Jews wash their hands before they eat bread, just like the context and the passage clearly states. It is that simple. Now, Going back to my friend here. Let me rewind this a little bit.
The discussion was about dirt on your hands,
right?
Spiritually defiling bread.
That's right. That is correct. The Pharisees did not understand that. The disciples did understand that. How do we know they understood that? Because they were no longer washing their hands before they eat bread like all Jews do and like they used to. Had they not understood that, then they would have continued to wash their hands before they ate bread. That is the context. That's just common sense. It is crystal clear.
It was already made clean. Secondly, the second part
of the bread was already made clean. An interesting point. As he said, the bread was already clean. The bread was already clean. He's talking about dirt on the hands. That's what this, and he's right. So far, he's right.
Context was about the rabbinical law superseding that of God's law,
right?
Meaning man's law was more important than God's law.
Right, and we see that in the text. We see that in the text. We just go back to the first 13 verses. We see after that he brings up again he brings up the law of Corban, the honor your father and your mother. Okay, as he shows right here again in verse 7, howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for the doctrines the commandment of men. He sees in verse 13, he emphasizes the point my friend is making the word of Yahweh of no effect through your tradition, which you have delivered, and many such like things do you. He's right. So far, I agree with him.
Thirdly, if we're going to take the statement, thus declaring all foods clean.
Okay, sorry about that.
To a first century Jew, this was not about reclassifying what food is clean and unclean. It was about food that was already classified as clean by the Father, is not made defiled by dirt on your hands.
This is where he's incorrect. This is where he's incorrect. To a first century Jew, that's that move that Torah observant teachers like to pull. You got to understand second temple period Judaism. And again, there's nothing wrong with exegesis and that stuff like that. I understand what they're saying. However, though, we got to go to 1 Corinthians 2, beginning in verse 6, and understand that we speak wisdom in a mystery. You can see it here on the screen. 1 Corinthians 2:6. However, we speak wisdom among those that are mature, yet not a wisdom of this age. We got to understand first century Judaism. No, we don't. No. That is not what Paul is showing here. We do not know. We speak wisdom in a mystery amongst those that are mature, yet not a wisdom of this age. First century Judaism, no. Nor of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. But we speak the wisdom of Yahweh in a mystery, the hidden wisdom which Yahweh ordained before the ages for our glory, which none of the rulers of this world had known, for if they'd known it, they would not have impelled the sovereign of glory. But it is written, things that eye have seen not, nor ear have heard not, nor have entered in the heart of man, the things which Yahweh has prepared for those who love him. But Yahweh has revealed them to us through his Spirit. For the Spirit searches all things, yes, the deep things of Yahweh. For what man knows the things of a man except the spirit of the man which is in him? Even so now, no one knows the things of Yahweh except the Spirit of Yahweh. Now we receive not the spirit of this world, but the Spirit whom is from Yahweh, that we might know the things that have been freely given to us by Yahweh. We see that clearly in the text. So no, this whole thing of no. This is why the passage shows. This is why the passage shows in verse 16, let he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, what our Torah observant these Torah observant teachers try to do, and it's sad. It really is. That's why, again, I'm here to help folks, just trying to help. Let me get up to that screen. Here we go. What they're asserting is this. They're asserting that Torah observant teachers like my friend here They teach us context that the disciples did not understand why they were no longer washing their hands before they ate bread like all Jews do after the tradition of the elders, which is why the Pharisees asked why the disciples did not understand that they are supposed to wash their hands before they eat bread like all Jews after the tradition of the elders. Folks, does that make any sense? No, that makes no sense at all. Again, what my friend fails to realize here is this. After verse 13, Yahshua is done talking to the Pharisees. He is done talking to them. The subject matter was about washing your hands before you eat bread. That is correct. We know that all Jews do that because verse 3 of Mark 7 says all Jews do, except these Jews right here, the disciples of the disciples of Yahshua. So the question is, coming from the Pharisees and scribes, why are these Jews not doing what all Jews do? Does the context support that the disciples understand that eating with unwashed hands does not defile a man because it is a commandment of men? Of course it does. I just showed you. And matter of fact, I didn't show you. The text showed us, folks. Let's go back again one more time. Here it is. What does the context show? The context shows that the disciples no longer do what all Jews do. This indicates that they understand well now that this is a commandment of men. In fact, when the Pharisees ask, why are your disciples not doing what all Jews do? Yahshua answers their question clearly by explaining it is a doctrine and commandment of men, meaning that the disciples were already told this by Yahshua and they understand that, which is why the text shows and the context that they are no longer washing their hands because it is a commandment and tradition of men, not of Yahweh. Had the disciples not understood this, then they would have continued to wash their hands like all Jews do, just like the context supports. Now, what Torah observant teachers and my friend here are not telling you is this. When you get to verse 14, the topic changes. The subject changes. It is expounded on. The audience changes. When you get to verse 14, we find that the Pharisees are out of the equation. Verse 14, and when he had called all the people, does it say he called the Pharisees? No. When he called all the people unto him, he said unto them, listen to me, everyone, and understand. There is nothing. Does this passage say that washing your hands before you eat bread doesn't defile you? No, because he is no longer talking about washing your hands before you eat bread. He is expounding. There is nothing, not one thing. We could even look up that Greek word. This is in the original Greek text. There is not one thing from without a man, outside of the man, that entering into him can defile him. But the things which come out of him, those are they that defile the man. If any man have ears to ears, if any man has ears to hear, let him hear. We speak wisdom in a mystery in the Spirit. Thus, if any man have ears to hear, let him hear, as the KJV shows. Verse 17, and when he had entered into the house from the people, so the Pharisees are gone, the multitude is gone, it's just him and the disciples, and his disciples asked him concerning the parable. And he said unto them, are you still without understanding also? Now, What is he rebuking Peter and the disciples about? He's rebuking them because they don't understand this subject right here. Torah observant teachers, what they try to do is they try to pull a fast one on you. They try to pull a fast one on you. They're going to tell you, no. The context, keep it in context. The context clearly shows that Yahshua is jumping on them. Yahshua Messiah is jumping on the disciples because they don't understand that eating with unwashed hands doesn't defile you. Where does that lead us? Right back to the absurdity of the context. Torah observant teachers teach as context that the disciples didn't understand why they were no longer washing their hands before they ate bread, like all Jews do. They have no idea. We have no idea why we're no longer washing our hands before we eat bread. We just don't know why we're clueless. We're clueless. Okay. Which causes this is how absurd this is. Which causes the Pharisees and scribes. Okay. Which causes the Pharisees and scribes ask why the disciples did not understand that they are supposed to wash their hands before they eat bread, like all Jews do. Folks, that is not context. That is called deception. That is not called context. That is not called context. That is called deception. These fellas, the disciples, understood. In fact, in verse 6, Yahshua, in verse 7, Mark 7:7, Yahshua gives the answers to the Pharisees why the disciples are not eating anymore with washed hands, because it is a commandment of men. Meaning that the disciples understand, yep, that's why we're not washing our hands anymore like all Jews do, because we were taught it is a commandment of men. It does not defile you. Now, where does this take us? This takes us now to the context of what he's talking about. The disciples this has nothing to do with eating with unwashed hands. They don't understand this part right here. What do you mean, nothing? What do you mean, Yahshua? Not one thing from outside the man. Wait a minute. What about a ham sandwich? Wait a minute. How does that work? Wait a minute. Thus, he declares all foods clean, even though it doesn't say that in the original Greek, but it doesn't have to say that because it is saying that. The context is clear. It is the absurdity. Again, excuse my passion on that because it's so easy to see the trick they're trying to pull. This is they're going to lead, sadly. I mean, just look at the context. Look at the context right there. That is what they're asking. And this is where he says, nothing that goes into a man's mouth through the stomach and out the drought can defile a man. Then Peter's given the Great Commission, but Peter doesn't go because he can't get a kosher meal outside of Judea. Then 10 years later, after Peter makes void the commandment of Yahshua to go to all the nations, Peter has made void the commandment of Yahshua to go to all the nations. 10 years have gone by. 10 years. Are you still without understanding, Peter, that whatever goes into your mouth through the stomach and out the drought does not defile a man? There is nothing outside the man that entering into the man can defile the man. But what comes out of your mouth, that defiles a man. So we go to Acts 10. Arise, Peter, kill and eat. Nope, not so. I'm justified by works of the law, not works of faith like Abraham. What Elohim has cleansed, what did he clean? What did he cleanse in Mark 7? What did he cleanse in Mark 7, folks? There's your context. There's your context. You do not call common. But the Torah observant teacher is quick to tell you, not so fast. Peter Peter said. Peter said in Acts 10:28 what the vision meant. Peter said. And what they're not going to tell you is this. What they won't tell you, none of them. What they will not tell you is this right here. Actually, let's go over here. Pull it up this way. What they won't tell you is this right over here. Do I get to it? Pull up a visual to help y'all out, guys. Let's see. Here we go. What they're not going to tell you is this. Peter speaks over 90 times in all of the Bible, folks. Peter speaks over 90 times in all of the Bible. But, folks, did you know there's only one place in all of the Bible, only one place in all the Bible that records Peter opened his mouth and said, happens to be in Acts chapter 10. Let me repeat that. Out of all the places the Apostle Peter speaks, including his own epistle, all of them, over 90 times, you will find him speaking in the Bible. But yet there's only one place in all the Bible that records, and Peter opened his mouth and said, happens to be in Acts chapter 10. Now, folks, did our Savior not tell Peter in Mark 7 and Matthew 15, did he not get on Peter and say, are you still without understanding, Peter, that what goes into your mouth, through your belly and out the drought, does not defile a man, but what comes out of your mouth, that defiles a man? And what do you know? The only place where we find Peter opened his mouth and said happens to be in Acts chapter 10. Wow. Coincidence? No, folks. We speak wisdom in a mystery. It is that simple. It is really that simple. Torah observant teachers are then going to go on and tell you, oh, well, you got to understand that Peter repeats the vision again. He gives you the interpretation again in Acts chapter 11 when he tells the men from James, when he tells the men of the circumcision, when he tells the believing Jews in Jerusalem, the same guys that you find in Galatians 2, 11 through 14, the same guys you find in Galatians 2, 11 through 14, he tells them the interpretation of the vision had nothing to do with food, nothing to do with food at all. And then they held their peace and they glorified Yahweh. Remember, their contention was that he ate with Gentiles. But after he tells them the vision incorrectly, they hold their peace and glorify Yahweh. Meaning that they understand it's okay to eat with Gentiles. It is okay to eat with Gentiles now. Otherwise, they would never have held their peace and glorified Yahweh. So long as everyone is keeping kosher, because the vision had nothing to do with food. Right, Pete? Right. Then, 5 years later, what do we find? Peter doing the total opposite. The total opposite of what Torah observant teachers say. He confidently affirmed in Acts 10:28. Why is that? Why is Peter afraid of believing Jews that he told 5 years earlier, and they held their peace and glorified Yahweh? And what is Peter compelling Gentiles to do that Jews do, but Gentiles don't do? I don't know, maybe keep Leviticus 11? Exactly. But your Torah observant teachers will tell you this. This is the context you're going to get from the Torah observant teacher when now you're confronted with what's going on in Galatians 2, 11 to 14. What is going on in Galatians 2:11-14? Why is Peter doing the total opposite? Why is Peter doing the total opposite of what you all said the vision meant? Well, they're going to tell you this. Well, you got to understand, this is Peter right here. Peter was afraid of believing Jews. He was afraid of believing Jews who believe in Yahshua, who he told his vision to, and they held their peace and they glorified Yahweh. But in Acts chapter 5, Peter was not afraid of the Sanhedrin, who were unbelieving Jews, and they'll stone you to death, and killed Yahshua the Messiah, when they told Peter, we told you not to preach in that name of Yahshua the Messiah. And Peter boldly told them back, we must obey Yahweh rather than men, and he showed no fear of the Sanhedrin. But Peter's afraid of believing Jews who believe that let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Peter's afraid of the same guys that held their peace and glorified Yahweh. Does that make sense? Is that context? No, folks. That is an abomination to insinuate that's context. Peter messed up the vision. It is that simple. Now go read Galatians 2:11-13. That is the context. Love you, folks. Yahweh bless you. Do not be offended. Just doing my job, folks. And remember, this is another edition of Hold Them Back.
Standing by.
Gray leader standing by.
Green leader standing by. Lock S files and attack positions.
May the force be with us.
We've got to be able to get some kind of reading on that shield, up or down. Well, how could they be jamming us if they don't know if we're coming? Break off the attack. The shield is still up.
I got no reading. You sure?
Pull up! All craft, pull up!
Take a base of action. Green group, stay close to holding sector and each other.
Admiral, we have enemy ships in sector 47.
It's a trap.
Fighters coming in. There's too many of them. Accelerate to attack speed. Draw their fire away from the cruisers.
Copy, Gold Leader.